This is a CBS News special report. I'm Norah O'Donnell in Washington, and we are coming on the air because the war in Ukraine has begun. Just minutes after Russian President Vladimir Putin announced a special military operation in eastern Ukraine, explosions were heard in Kyiv, and that is where Charlie D'Agata is tonight. And Charlie, tell us what you're hearing and seeing.
Well, it's just a few moments ago we heard 5 loud explosions.
3 to begin with.
That sounded like a fighter jet overhead. So 3 to begin with, followed by 2 more. It's just after 5:15 in the morning here in Kyiv. There were reports of explosions earlier tonight or earlier this morning here, and then what was very clear, distinctive explosions, 5 in a row, 3 followed by 2 more after that, and then whatever that was, which sounded like a fighter jet coming in.
And, of course, the airspace has been closed there. Charlie, describe the situation. We did hear from the president of Ukraine earlier tonight. He's there. He has not fled his country.
Yes, well, you know, Nora, we've been following this for so many days and weeks, and the tensions have been building up, and we've all been expecting, you know, something major to happen, an invasion, possibly airstrikes. We thought it might be happening in the east, and we know the fighting has been taking place in the east, but we also know that there are targets, legitimate, well, the Russians would consider them legitimate targets here in Ukraine itself. And I was going to say last night, not necessarily last night, we went to bed thinking, well, maybe this is the night where a full-scale invasion might take place. An invasion like that would start with airstrikes, we've been told. And then those explosions earlier, about 10 minutes ago, and then what you just heard.
That's right.
5 explosions that we've heard here in the Capitol, and then whatever that was flying overhead.
Yes, Charlie D'Agata, as much of our team has been up through the night in Ukraine. Let's turn now to Holly Williams, who is also hearing reports of explosions there in Kharkiv. Holly, describe what you're hearing and seeing.
Yeah, Nora, we're actually hearing what sound like explosions, very loud thuds. I would say more than a dozen of them at this point, beginning at about 5:05 in the morning. Sounds like explosions. We can't confirm what they are, but of course the suspicion is that they're missile strikes or air strikes. I am in the city of Kharkiv, which is only about, about 20 miles from the Russian border, and a very, very big center for a Russian military build-up near the city of Belgorod. We should point out that in that speech that President Putin aired on Russian state TV just a short time ago, he said that Russia's plans do not include an occupation of Ukraine, but he said that Russia will seek to demilitarize Ukraine, and clashes between the two militaries are inevitable. What that means at this point, we don't know.
Holly Williams, thank you. We have been standing by all night waiting for what is likely a full-scale invasion into Ukraine, with U.S. officials saying that what would happen first is that the Russians would try to conduct strikes on air defense systems. Then they would move to cut off Kyiv, the capital, from eastern Ukraine. Then they would move to cut off Ukraine's military forces on the line and seize the airport so that they could then begin funneling in those Russian assets. Again, this is just beginning at this hour. Let's bring in Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan, who has been speaking with her sources and contacts all around the world. And Margaret, what are you learning?
You know, Nora, the only person who knows what happens next is Vladimir Putin. We know, and U.S. officials have been on standby for hours now. This looks like it's playing out exactly as they predicted with those airstrikes that you just laid out. I'm told to also pay particular attention to whether special forces show up in Kyiv, the capital. It was interesting that Vladimir Putin, in this surprise address to his nation in the middle of the night, gave what appeared to be a prerequisite recorded speech, but he said he has launched a special military operation to protect Donbass. That's the region to the east where back in 2014, a war really was underway and continues to be underway at a low boil. 14,000 people killed, but certainly the explosion in violence that we've seen in recent days has reignited that. And really, Nora, what this is, according to the officials I speak to, is this plan to slowly strangle Ukraine. And whether or not there's a full occupation is not clear. Vladimir Putin, according to U.S. officials who have spoken to David Martin, our correspondent, and to me, say Vladimir Putin is certainly prepared for that. But right now, it certainly appears he's at a minimum trying to project control once again through a mix of political and military coercion. The officials I've been reaching out for the past few hours say that at this moment, they don't see a diplomatic way out of this. So we can't say diplomacy is completely dead. It never really is. But no one at this point, Nora, sees an off-ramp.
Margaret, we may be witnessing now what is the beginning of the bloodiest conflict in Europe since World War II. The estimates from U.S. officials about the potential number of casualties in Ukraine, a refugee crisis, describe those really dire numbers.
You're exactly right. This isn't just a story about Ukraine. This is about potential destabilization in the center of the continent of Europe. You are looking at U.S. projections of upwards of 5 million refugees who, according to the United States, would likely spill into NATO allied countries that border them. That means Poland, that means Romania, some of those countries where the U.S. has plussed up forces to help buttress NATO. Remember, it is NATO, 30 countries that have that collective defense agreement. Ukraine's not one of them. No one is coming to defend Ukraine. But what the NATO allies are doing is shoring up their own defenses. And the reason they're doing this is because of the concern that this could spread into a regional conflict. You have Russian forces on high alert in very close proximity to NATO forces on high alert. This could escalate quickly. It's very dangerous. And certainly with the refugee crisis, Nora, that is destabilizing. And that has a huge spill-on effect for the global economy, for the political stability of some of those countries. So that is why we have heard the Biden administration and really the world in that UN Security Council emergency meeting tonight sketch this out as a risk to democracy, as a risk to global order, and to the international system. So this is hugely important, though it's 5,000 miles away. The people of Ukraine have felt that they have been left to themselves, to defend themselves since 2014 when Russia began this invasion. And the Obama-Biden administration and the Western allies decided then not to send lethal aid, not to send forces to defend it. They did pour in money and weapons. So since that time, Ukraine has built up its ability to defend itself. It was the Trump administration who sent lethal aid a few years later. So this won't be easy. This will be bloody. But this is something that, as you said, Nora, will have global implications.
And to put that in context, of course, Ukraine is a country that is about the size of the state of Texas, has about 40 million residents. It is a big country. Certainly a number of people will be affected, and as you point out, right in the heart there, and could create a regional conflict. Let's bring in our national security correspondent, David Martin. He is at the Pentagon. And David, I know you're speaking with NATO officials as well who are confirming that this Russian attack has begun.
That's right. Those explosions that Charlie and Holly are hearing are, according to a NATO official, the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And if it goes according to the way U.S. officials believe it will go, this shelling, whether it comes from ballistic missiles, airstrikes, or simply artillery, will continue up until daybreak, and then you will start to see ground operations. You might see airborne troops either carried by helicopters or jumping as paratroopers from planes coming in to take key locations, cities, major intersections, and then you would see tanks coming across the border in a classic invasion force going into Ukraine. Whether or not that's exactly how it plays out, of course, we'll only know when the sun comes up.
And of course, the U.S. has deployed a limited number of troops to NATO countries. It has moved some around, but the president, again, being clear, we will not send U.S. troops into Ukraine to defend the people there. David Martin, thank you. Let's turn to Holly Williams again, because, Holly, you have spent so much time on the ground in Ukraine over the years. And I want to ask you about that because we heard President Zelensky. He did not flee, and yet today he tried to appeal. He tried to call President Putin, and he also delivered a speech where he said, we will defend ourselves. When you attack, you will see our faces, not our backs. But can Ukraine defend itself? How quickly could it fall if the Russians seize the capital?
It's so difficult to say, Nora. What we can say is that the Ukrainians are massively outmanned and outgunned by the Russians. They have about a quarter of their manpower in their military. And when you look at the hardware, just a fraction. Remember, we're talking about possibly the biggest land war that Europe has seen since the Second World War. But this country is already at war and has been against Russian-backed separatists for nearly 8 years. It's a bloody conflict. More than 14,000 people have already been killed, according to Ukraine. We've been near and around the front line in recent days where there's been a big escalation. We've been in towns and villages that are devastated, people's homes very badly damaged. And if this is now a full-blown Russian invasion, US officials have warned that that could mean up to 100,000 civilian casualties in Ukraine and millions of refugees.
Holly, just how bloody do you think this conflict could become?
It's so difficult to tell, Nora. It depends. It depends if the Russian forces simply go into the parts of eastern Ukraine that are already controlled by Russian-backed separatists. We wouldn't expect to see a lot of fighting there. In that case, it might not be very bloody. But then, in the last few minutes, we've been hearing what sound like either airstrikes or missile strikes, both here in Kharkiv and our colleagues in the capital of Kyiv. Are those strikes on military facilities? We don't know. Have there been any casualties at this point? Also, we don't know. I think that we'll have a lot more clarity in the hours to come.
Holly Williams, thank you. And we should note that we had heard from White House officials that the president is monitoring the situation very closely. They have just put out a statement from the president of the United States saying that the prayers of the entire world are with the people of Ukraine as they suffer an unprovoked and unjustified attack by Russian military forces. President Biden going on to say that President Putin has chosen a premeditated war that will bring a catastrophic loss of life and human suffering, and placing the blame on Russia, saying Russia alone is responsible for the deaths and destruction that this attack will bring. The president pledging to hold more talks with G7 leaders. I spoke earlier today with the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who said that the U.S. will respond with more tough sanctions against the Russian government. So we will continue to follow that here at CBS News, and we will come back on the air if more news warrants. Want to thank our correspondents and producers and crews all around the globe who have been up all night monitoring this, as well as all of our reporting teams here in Washington. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington.